Let's get started. It's 3 o'clock. We may have more joiners, but I'm gonna be going through like quite a lot of information. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie. I bartend and also the beverage manager on some of the boats. And I'm really excited to do this. We miss you guys. Miss mixing drinks for y'all. I call this Beyond the Quarantini. As far as I know, the Quarantini is a potent mixture of vodka and emergency, which actually sounds really good and, you know, preventative. So who can knock it? So we're not going to reinvent that. We're just going to basically go over some formulas that you can use and kind of mix and match at home with whatever you have on hand. And I am here. I don't have any of my bartending tools. The only alcohol I have is sherry and rum. So we're going to play around with that. I'm going to tell you how you can use what you have. And I think if you've been on board with me, you also know I'm kind of passionate about always providing non-alcoholic options that you can then add alcohol to if you want. So we will do a couple of non-alcoholic things first. I really like to do what I call refrigerator bartending, which is kind of like where you go to the fridge when you're cooking and you're like, what's wilting or what do I need to use? And then maybe you go online and look up either like flavors that go well together, complementary flavors, or maybe you look up, you know, recipes for XYZ ingredients. So you can do that with cocktails also. But with cocktails, as with cooking, it's just kind of about knowing the techniques and then just kind of plugging them in and understanding how to utilize them with whatever you have. Some websites, though, that I do like in case you want to look up recipes. Esquire actually has really good cocktail recipes. Punch Drink, Serious Eats, and Epicurious are all good resources. There's a lot of like kind of cruddy or weird cocktail recipes floating around out there, which I encourage you to also try. One of my favorite things about being on board with y'all for a whole week is that we get to try different things that you might not necessarily try at home. Like I kind of get to know your palate and then push you a little bit. And since it's all inclusive, it's like no fail, win-win. So you kind of can do the same thing in quarantine, basically, just kind of experiment. We have time and we have kind of a fixed set of ingredients here, right? Like you're not going to necessarily go out and shop to make, you can go out and shop to make the drink you want to make, but you don't have to. You can play around with what you have. So we're going to start by making one of my favorite things, which is a ginger syrup. And I do a ginger citrus syrup. So on board, I make it with lemon juice and lemon zest, and then fresh ginger, and usually with fine white sugar. I have honey here, and I really love honey. So I'm using basically 1 part honey, 1 part water, because we're making a simple syrup. And the simple syrup ratio is always going to be 1-to-1 sweet and water. You can also make a rich simple, which is going to be 2 parts sweet and 1 part water. And you can really use any kind of sweet. Like I'm using honey, you can use superfine sugar, you can use brown sugar is delicious, or demerara sugar. So you can kind of play around with that. You can also use some infusions. So like we're using ginger, but it's really good with fruit or herbs. If you don't have a triple sec at home and you want to make a margarita, one of my favorite simple syrups is orange simple syrup. And what I do is I just make the simple syrup and then add orange zest, and I add the sliced orange juice so the juice can infuse a little bit. Just let it cool down and maybe sit overnight in the fridge, and then you can strain it. And you can use that like triple sec. It's going to be a little bit sweeter than triple sec, but it's a really good option. So for the ginger syrup, I kind of eyeball it. I usually use like kind of a similar amount of ginger and citrus. If this was a lemon, I would probably just use 1, since lemons tend to be larger than limes. But today I'm going to use limes because ginger and lime, great base for tons of cocktails. All of your mules, your dark and stormy. It's also just really good by itself. You can put it in hot water or soda if you want something non-alcoholic. And it's easy and delicious. You can store this in your fridge for about a month. and it'll last, and you can maybe wow your friends if it opens back up. So what we're gonna do, I have in here 1 cup of honey and 1 cup of water, just my little pot here. And this is probably roughly half a cup of each of these. So if you want to think about it that way, I like it pretty gingery and citrusy. So if I was making it on board to use, I'd probably only use 1 lime, just to get the ginger flavor coming through a little bit more. But since I kind of want to use this for the basis of mules and dark and stormies, I'm going to do a little extra citrus juice. So for the ginger, you actually don't really need to peel it. As long as it's, you know, not, it's a root, so it's not going to be too chemically, but if you feel comfortable with your grocery store ginger and rinse it, you can just do like a rough chop. What you're going to want to do with when you're infusing or macerating things is just the more surface area that it has with your sweetener or alcohol or water, the more it's going to infuse, or the quicker it's going to infuse. So basically, the finer you chop this, you can even put it in like a food processor if you want. That will be a little bit tougher to strain, and I don't have a fine mesh strainer here, but you can totally do that if you want to do it quicker. And this simple syrup, we're actually going to heat up on the stove, but mostly when I'm making them on the boat, I don't do that because when you heat up the syrup, you're losing some of the water, right? It's going out as steam. So you're not changing the ratio. And I like to control my ratios as much as possible. But with this, we're going to be adding in some citrus juice, and that's going to dilute it a little bit more. So I just put that chopped up ginger in, and we're going to put it on like medium low. I want it to come up to a simmer, and then we're going to simmer it for about 10 minutes. So, all right, cool. And while we're doing that, I always like to have one thing going when I'm cooking, while I'm doing another thing. While that is simmering, we're gonna make a shrub and another simple syrup to go with our alcoholic drinks. Oh, I was gonna tell you guys too, if you have questions, I think the easiest way to do it with Zoom is we'll do questions at the end. Liz, our lovely moderator, you can type your questions into the chat box, and then I will answer all of them at the end. So before we make the shrub, let's make one more simple syrup to go into our alcoholic cocktail later on. This is something called an oleosaccharum. It's really cool. So basically, I put half a cup of white sugar with the peel of 1 lemon and 1 mandarin like 6 hours ago. And I think you can see how much the sugar has extracted that citrus oil. It's a really easy way to make a super delicious, flavorful syrup. I have some water boiling on the stove. I put half a cup of sugar in here. So I'm gonna put half a cup of hot water. So again, it's I think it's easier to use ratios than recipes. That's how, you know, sometimes if you're like, oh, how does the bartender remember so many drinks? It's because we do it by ratio. And that allows you to memorize like a whole bunch of stuff or kind of apply it to whatever you have. With the simple syrup, so you're gonna measure out your sugar, and then you're gonna add your hot water, and you're gonna stir it until it turns clear, and that'll mean that it's come into solution. So I'm just gonna get all that yummy citrus oil infused syrup. And I am gonna let the citrus peel cool in this syrup too, because again, that'll give it a little more time and another method of extraction, which is the hot water. I hope this isn't too boring. It's kind of like a cooking show and like sitting in our bar on board. Imagine there's a glacier and some whales and maybe some porpoises outside the boat. All right. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I think this is going to be a pretty stable syrup now that it's turned clear. And again, the simple syrup will keep in your fridge for probably about a month, depending on what you've infused it with. If you like used kind of like fresh fruit, maybe like strawberries, it might last for a little bit less time, but the sugar is going to help it preserve it. And sometimes in bars, like you don't even need to refrigerate it because you're using it in such high volume. But I'm assuming that most of us at home are not going to use a ton. Me, I'm here by myself, so that's why I'm making smaller amounts too, because I can drink a lot, but I don't need to. So, okay, so we're done with this. Our ginger syrup is simmering, and now we're going to make a shrub. You may have had this on board with me. It's something I love to make for the crew as a non-alcoholic kind of fancy treat. Ooh, is basically, so fruit or herbs or spices with vinegar and sugar. And it's a nice, very old-fashioned way of kind of preserving something fresh for a little bit longer, preserving those calories and those nutrients. So basically you can use whatever you have on hand. If it's using fruit, it's going to be a shrub. If it's using just herbs and spices, it's going to be a switchel. One of the favorites on board, started by Lee, one of our other bartenders, is a ginger, turmeric, cayenne, lemon, and black pepper switchel. Super tasty. I'm going to make a strawberry and lemon balm shrub. They had a sale on strawberries last time I was at the grocery store. And this is locally foraged lemon balm from somebody's like street side little garden. It really it is a weed around here, so it's pretty fun. Sometimes you can find big patches of mint in your garden. That makes a great shrub too. Okay, so for a shrub, you're gonna need to strain it, and so again, I'm using what I have on hand, and I don't know about you guys, but I've been making that whipped Dalgona coffee with the instant coffee every day. If you haven't heard of it, look it up, it's delicious. So I'm not currently using my French press for its intended purpose, so I'm gonna repurpose it, and because I don't have a strainer, this is gonna be great, because tomorrow or the next day when the shrub's ready, I can just use the plunger and then it'll filter itself, right? And you're just, again, gonna wanna kind of do a rough chop of your fruit. For shrubs, again, I have a general ratio, but it's really gonna depend on what ingredients you're using. And it's kind of important, or it's really important, as with cooking, to kind of taste all of your ingredients. These strawberries are super sweet. So my usual ratio, kind of like go-to ratio, and we will write all these down too if you don't remember them, but I usually do like 5 parts of the fresh ingredient to 3 parts vinegar to 2 parts sugar or sweet thing. Could be honey. But if the fruit is sweeter, like these strawberries are incredibly sweet, I won't use as much sugar. I personally like it to be a little bit more vinegary and tart, but it's up to you, your flavor preference. The lemon balm is gonna be really flavorful and strong. It's gonna infuse quite quickly. It's quite a strong flavor profile. If you're using something a little bit more woody, cinnamon, sometimes that will take a little bit longer to infuse. So usually I would let a shrub sit anywhere between 24 hours to up to like 3 days. But you can kind of taste it every day. Give it a little stir, taste it, and just see how you like it. Okay. So for the lemon balm, gonna use the time-honored way of cutting herbs, where you make a little stack of the leaves and then roll them up and cut them in strips like you do with basil. You can also just tear it. It really just depends on what you're using. For the lemon balm, I'm probably just going to use about this much because, again, it's pretty intense flavor-wise. So just cut it into strips. Put that in there. All right, and then I'm gonna do a whole cup of apple cider vinegar. You can, it is fun to play around with the vinegar. I like apple cider vinegar because it's really good for you. But you could do, like I like to use red wine vinegar with red fruits, or sometimes with strawberries, it's nice to put in just a touch of balsamic. I wouldn't use balsamic solely as your vinegar because it's so intense in flavor, but just like maybe a tablespoon of balsamic for every cup of other vinegar. And you can do a combo of like, you can do red wine, apple cider. White vinegar is a little stronger, so you may want to like change your sugar depending on what vinegar you're using too. I have to save some of this sugar for my whipped coffee tomorrow. Okay, so I'm putting this in here, and then honestly, I'm just gonna take my little spoon and squish it up, macerate it, okay? That nice strawberry juice is gonna come out. And what I'm gonna do with this is put it in the fridge, and then I'm gonna taste it tomorrow, and if it tastes ready, I will strain it then. You can use this to like cook down into a compote after it's been infused if you want. I'm a big fan of no waste cooking, so feel free to play around with that too. For shrubs, one of my favorite things to do is to use it with either ginger beer, ginger ale, or soda water. But if you want to add alcohol, vodka or gin are really good. Gin is kind of a given for like botanical flavors, but could be really good with like a brandy or pisco. Sherry would be really tasty. You can use it in addition to like a citrus and a sweetener, or you can just play around with adding it to like sparkling wine, or doing equal parts of a shrub and some kind of base spirit and just shaking it or pouring it over ice. So just play around with your shrubs. It is, again, going to kind of depend on what kind of shrub you need. So stick it in the fridge. How's everybody doing? Give me a thumbs up if you're not bored. Okay. Okay, so our ginger syrup is simmering nicely. What I'm going to do now is actually turn it off. And while it's still hot, I'm going to add the peels of the limes. So for peeling citrus, I really like a Y peeler. That's probably my favorite, or some kind of paring knife. You're going to want to get the zest, but not the pith. But you can also just use a regular old potato peeler and just pop it right in there while it's warm. I'm not going to add the juice yet. Actually, you know what? I'm going to use this paring knife. Limes are a little harder to zest because they have thinner skin, but really, really tasty zest. If you wanted, it is going to be harder to strain, but you can also use an actual zester. And then the zest may just stay in the syrup, which is not a bad thing. Once it cools for about 45 minutes to an hour, then I'll add the juice of the limes. And I'll show you my, my improvised juicing method. I don't have one of those nice handy stand juicers here. So, all right, I'm kind of doing a quick job of this, but you get the idea. And then I'll just put this aside and we'll move on to alcoholic drinks. So if you've been on board with me, you know how much I like sherry. Sherry is a fortified wine, and it's a little bit lower proof. I've probably joked with you, we don't drink while we're on board because if there's an emergency, we need to have all our wits about us. So when we get off the boat, we usually have big plans, and then we have like 1 or 2 glasses of wine and have to go to bed early on the day that we get up. So I think that's why I like, partially why I like sherry, because it's lower proof. Your average fortified wine is going to be like 17 to 21% alcohol, as opposed to like 40% for probably your average liquor. So it's nice. You can have a couple of sherry and tonics and still feel okay the next day. All right, we'll set that aside. So for my sherry drink, my good family friend Emma Natkin made this incredible grapefruit marmalade. And my mom was nice enough to give it to me here in quarantine. So I'm actually going to use this. I'm going to shake it with some lemon juice and the sherry, and then I'm going to one of my really important things during quarantine, which is pamplemousse liqueur. I know, very basic, but oh, so good. This is going to be a little bit more bitter, but you can use jam, shake jam or jelly with alcohol and citrus, and it's delicious. The, I think, original cocktail that goes along with this idea is called a Preamble, and it's gin, blackberry jam, lime juice, and bitters, and it's so good. So you just kind of shake the jam right in there. There are going to be kind of chunks, but it's delicious. My improvised shaker here is my excellent little mason jar with my initial on it. It's nice. There's a tight seal, and I can use the lid to strain it, kind of like you strain spaghetti if I need to. And it's large enough that I can do a couple at once if I need to, if anybody ever comes over to hang out with me. Really quickly, while I'm making this, if you want to make stuff, I'm making citrusy cocktails today, and I'm going to kind of talk to you about your basic sour recipe and how to play around with it. But if you are like a Manhattan or martini drinker, you can play around with that too, especially if you have Amaro or any kind of fortified wine at home. The ratios for Manhattan, you do 2 parts of your base spirit, so generally some kind of whiskey, but it's really good with like rum, really good with brandy, scotch, and then 1 part fortified wine, and then some bitters if you have them. Angostura is probably the most common form of bitter out there. But play around with it. If you have like some kind of fruit or herbal liqueur that you haven't been able to know what to do with, try adding just like maybe 1/4 ounce of it to 2 ounces of your base spirit at first, and then you can keep adding more if you want. Depending on how bitter or sweet it is, you'll probably want to go easy on it. But it's fun to play around with. Or you could do a little bit of your simple syrup or your infused simple and kind of do an old-fashioned type cocktail with that. And I'll talk about dilution in just a sec. When you're building a cocktail, you want to start out with your cheapest or least voluminous ingredient first, simply because if you mess up, there's less to throw out. So you'd start with bitters, because usually you just put in a couple dashes. Probably the best example of this is going to be an egg white cocktail, right? If you like build your whole cocktail and then you're doing your egg white last and you accidentally drop the yolk in, I mean, what are you going to do? You have to make a flip. You have to start over. So I'm going to put in about 1 tablespoon of this delicious marmalade to start as my least voluminous ingredient. And then I'm going to do a little bit less than half a lemon. I used a wedge of this earlier. So I don't have a juicer, like I said, but my my workaround is I'm going to use this ubiquitous household item. And I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to kind of get the last bit of juice out. I'm doing it into a bowl instead of directly into the mixing glass, just in case there's any seeds, which there aren't, lucky us. And notice I'm not really doing it by volume. I'm not measuring it. When I first started, I was working at a bar where we just, we would juice to order. And so instead of saying like, oh, 3/4 of an ounce of lime juice, we'd say half a lime. The tricky part about this is you definitely have to taste it, because every lime tastes different. Some are more sour, some are sweeter. So you have to change up the ratio of sugar. And so you have to straw taste it. And, you know, contrary to popular opinion, it's actually really difficult to get drunk by straw tasting because you're only getting a few drops, but it does look a little funny. So I don't have a jigger here, but I am going to use my 1/3 of a cup measure, which is about 2.7 ounces. So normally, I think the most universal measurement for your base spirit is going to be 1.5 ounces. That's a pretty standard pour. That's, I think, what the U.S. Liquor Control Board considers to be 1 serving of hard alcohol. So you can do a little more. Obviously, like some cocktails like the Manhattan or Martini or Old Fashioned are going to have more than that. But I think that's a pretty good measure just to start out with. But Again, we're using a fortified, and I love the taste of sherry, so I am gonna go ahead and put a whole 2.7 ounces of this into my cocktail. Okay, so that's all of the ingredients that we're gonna shake. We're gonna add the soda water at the end. And I wanna talk to you a little bit about dilution, and I'm a total nerd. So dilution, water is a super important part of any cocktail. You can test this by trying your martini just chilled but not diluted, and then trying it diluted. Try them side by side. The one that's diluted is gonna taste way better, I guarantee it. Water kind of loosens up and brings out flavors. You can see this also with you Scotch drinkers. You know, some people add a couple drops of water. That will bring the hydrophobic molecules out of solution and get you some more of those volatile aromatic compounds on the back of your palate and make the taste totally change. So super important. First thing I always say to stews who want to be bartenders is you have to learn about dilution. So we have two different ice sizes here, and you may not have this, it's totally fine. Working with the ice you have, just think about which of these is gonna dilute faster. This one, right, because it's smaller, it has more surface area and contact with the liquid. So if I'm using this one, I'm either gonna shake it for less time or shake it a little bit more gently. Generally, when you're shaking a cocktail, depending on your ice, you're gonna shake it between 10 and 15 seconds, relatively vigorously. And if you're stirring a cocktail, you're gonna stir it for about 30 to 35 seconds. Now, you don't have to go like 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. What you can do at home is you can kind of taste it. Just taste it along the way and see what you like best. Play around with it. This one, I'm using the larger ice cubes because I am going to top it off with soda water. So I'm actually not going to shake it as vigorously, and I don't want it to dilute as much in here because soda water is like another way that I'm going to dilute it, right? So think about that if you're topping it off with champagne even, or sparkling wine, soda water, that kind of thing. Even soda, just think about that. I'm going to seal my mason jar. You can also, if you have like one of those big plastic cups and then you have a pint glass, you can make your own shaker out of that. Just be careful of the seal because otherwise it'll go everywhere. It's happened to me in bars. It's not fun. Okay, so I'm gonna shake this. If you, wait. All right, so just like that, notice that I kind of shook it in like a circular motion. I was trying not to break up the ice. There are some times that you do want to break up the ice and then you'll just like really go for it. But if you do it in kind of a circular motion, it's less likely to really get that ice into chips. And I'm gonna do what we call a dirty dump. So that means I'm not gonna pour it over fresh ice cubes. There are cases in which you would wanna pour it over fresh ice cubes. But in this case, since I'm gonna top it off with soda water anyway, and I don't have a ton of ice cubes, I'm just gonna use this one. And put it in a glass. My delicious marmalade chunks, top it off with soda water. I'll give it a little stir. And then Emma also made me king cherries with rum, so I'll use one of those to garnish it. This is one where, depending on your jam, you may want to add a little bit of extra sugar. I like kind of bitter drinks, so I didn't add extra sugar, but this is definitely kind of a more bitter jam. So if you're using marmalade, you may want to add a little extra simple syrup. You can also actually make simple syrup or kind of a syrup out of jam. Just add hot water to it and mix it up. And then put it with soda water or put it with alcohol. I'm like really not a fan of throwing things away. So if you have dregs in the bottom of your jam jar, you can use that. All right. This feels weird because on the boats I couldn't do this, but here we go. It's delicious. Really, really good. Cheers. Miss you guys. All right, so I'll just rinse out my mixing glass. And the last thing we're going to talk about is sours. So your basic sour ratio is going to be 2 parts spirit, 1 part sweet, and 1 part sour, right? Now you can add bitters to that. And then the sweet could be like a liqueur. So for example, in a margarita or a lemon drop or a sidecar, it's going to be either your curacao or your triple sec, or you could use your orange simple syrup that you made. And in some other drinks, you may have an infused simple syrup. But that's your basic ratio. So think about that when you're building a drink. And honestly, that works with pretty much anything. I could make it with the sherry. Really it works really well with a lot of different things. I'm going to use lemon heart rum, which is so good. And rum is interesting. Like, you probably noticed if you have drunk any kind of rum, it really runs the gamut more than almost any other spirit, from real funky like Jamaican, like fruity, estery, weird rum, to like the really kind of caramelly, chocolatey, sweeter, dark sugar rum, or cachaça, which is like a totally different bird. But lemon heart is delicious. It's from Guyana, and that's why it also says crum, which is the French word for rum. I'm going to use that, but I'm not going to add it to the glass first because it's our most voluminous and most expensive ingredient. So the first thing I'm going to add is juice of half a lime. So actually, if you roll the lime a little bit, it'll give a little more juice out. That's what I'm doing this. All right. Cut this baby in half and do our time-honored juicing technique. Limes are a little bit harder to squeeze than lemons. Helps if they're at room temperature, and it helps if you roll them a little bit. We'll use our fork. All right, so we'll pop that in there. All right, cool. And then I am gonna use 1 tablespoon of our simple syrup. Now, 2 tablespoons is an ounce. So if you don't have a jigger at home, just think about using a tablespoon for your measuring your citrus and your simple syrup. I personally like my daiquiris a little bit more tart, so I'm just going to start out with 1 tablespoon or half an ounce. And that's our oleo sacrum, so it should be really tasty. The other thing so if this were just like a simple daiquiri, it would just be rum, lime juice, and sugar. I am gonna play around. So I have these beautiful little mandarins. I'm gonna use the juice of one of those. And I have these vanilla beans that have been soaking in rum. So it's basically, vanilla essence. I'm gonna put a little bit of that in. I'll put 1 tablespoon of that in. And I love bitters. I think bitters makes everything better. So I'm gonna put in 2 dashes of Angostura. If you have bitters at home, play around with how much you like. You can even use this as the base for a cocktail. There's a really tasty cocktail called a Trinidad Sour that has orgeat, which is kind of an almond syrup, lime, Angostura, quite a lot, like an ounce of Angostura, and rye whiskey. And it's delicious. Okay, I'm not gonna put in 2.7 ounces of rum because I have things that I need to do later today. So I'm just gonna kind of eyeball an ounce and a half here. All right. And for this one, I'm gonna use the smaller ice because time is of the essence and I am thirsty. But because I'm using the smaller ice, I'm going to shake it for less time. And you can eyeball the amount of ice. You want a good amount of ice, but as long as you have room in your container, you don't have to use a ton of ice. If you're not using very much ice, just shake it for a little more time. Okay. We're gonna use a fancy glass here. gonna shake the heck out of this. All right, look at that. And I'm gonna use my strainer technique here. All right. It's not perfect, but sure works for me. I'm gonna discard the ice from this. And let's garnish it with one of the beautiful little edible flowers my mom gave me. Here, good snack. All right, so that's your daiquiri. That's really all that I have prepared for y'all. I'm hoping that the ratios can kind of give you some ideas of what to play around with. But now at this point, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them, and Liz can tell me.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the essence, basically, of lemon or orange or whatever you're using, could you use essential oils that were like lemon or herbs or whatever in place?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. Because the ways to get flavor into something, infuse it, right? And you can infuse alcohol too. So if you have like some cruddy vodka sitting around, you can put some ginger or herbs or
Oh.
But yeah, with essential oil though, just go really, really easy. Like start out with a couple of drops. And,
right.
Yeah, and then you can always add more, but you can't take it out.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
good question. Let's see, who's next?
No question.
Didn't you have something?
If you have some questions, you can drop it in the chat. You can raise your hand. Let me know if you'd like me to unmute you.
Liz, will you read me the chats?
It just, everyone's just saying delightful and
awesome. Okay, no questions in there.
Nope.
Anne has a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Well, I couldn't understand what you were calling those drinks at the very first, like a shrub or a
shrub. It's just like a bush, like a
shrub.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
What was the other one?
The other one is Switchel. 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 Yeah, pretty old-fashioned names, but very charming.
Okay, got it.
Nice to see you guys, by the way.
it's great to
You
see
too.
you. Yeah. So where are you right now?
I am in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah. Okay.
Really
Good
unusual.
for you.
How about you guys? Where are you?
We're in Oklahoma.
Oh, geez. How is it there? Still pretty
Spring
That's
light.
okay.
Spring light.
Dodged the hail last night, so.
nice. Yeah, I'm kind of going back and forth here between really cold and really nice. Margie, did you guys have a question? Let's see.
Julie.
Yeah.
No, we're good, Julie. This has been fun.
Okay, awesome. Hey, this is really, really great.
Great.
I can't wait to see you in person again. Happy cocktail making.
I have to go, Julie.
I love you,
This has been
Ruthie.
wonderful. I love you too, sweetheart. Work on your music.
Okay,
Bye-bye, honey.
bye. Anybody else? Any questions at all?
This is the other Margie, and I've never been on an uncruise ship, but I follow you on internet.
Excellent.
You had said, and I may have missed it, that you were going to include the recipe at some point.
Yeah, so I think we'll put them in the Facebook notes. Is that right, Liz?
yes, we can include them in the post once this is ready for a repost, and everybody can re-watch the replay once we get that posted for you.
Awesome. But Margie, did you want me to repeat any recipes specifically currently?
No, I'll just wait for the notes on the
Okay.
Facebook.
I'm mostly gonna give you guys ratios, but I will put the recipes of the things that I made today.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Julie, it's the other Margie.
Margie, hi.
How would you use the ginger and lime syrup you made to make a dark and stormy?
Oh, okay. So honestly, dark rum, the kind of go-to is Gosling's Black Seal, but you could use like a dark Jamaican rum would be really good. Honestly, you could use the Lemon Heart, like whatever you have on hand. Or if you don't, you could even put a little bit of molasses into the syrup and then just use a white rum.
To get the color. Okay.
And the kind of like the darker flavor. But then I just put it with soda water and probably just another squeeze of lime and some ice. Just
Easy.
I would put like I would probably use about an ounce of the syrup depending on how much citrus depending on how sweet it is. Kind of play around with it. But with the one that I made, since I'm going to put in the juice of 2 limes, I would probably put an ounce of that, about 2 ounces of rum, and then just top it off with soda water and squeeze the bubble.
Okay, and you're gonna let that sit for 24 hours before you put the lime in?
I'm gonna put the lime in. I'm just gonna do it now.
Okay.
But I'm actually not gonna strain it until tomorrow. So
Okay.
I let it cool down totally with the ginger, because that way it kind of gets that gingery deliciousness. It's really, really good recipe.
So Julie,
Yeah.
quick question.
Yeah.
We make our own blackberry jalapeno jam.
Ooh, that sounds so good.
So what would you do with that and gin?
That and gin. Do you have any fortified wine on hand? Or?
No.
Okay.
The
No,
liquor
Pork.
stores
Well,
are.
no, we
Yeah, I
have pork. We have
Pork.
pork for sure.
you want port. Oh, that would be delicious. Yeah, I would do gin, blackberry jalapeno jam. What kind of port is it?
Taylor or something.
Is it tawny or ruby?
Tawny.
Tawny. Okay, so don't use too much because that stuff's good on its own. But what I would do is probably like an ounce and a half of gin. How sweet is the jam?
Sweet.
It's sweet.
It's sweet. So maybe like start out with like a 1/4 ounce of jam, or like a half tablespoon. And then do you have limes or lemons?
Yeah.
Limes or lemons? I would use lemons, I think, to start. Maybe juice of half a lemon and try half an ounce of port. You can always add a little bit more lemon juice if your lemon's not super tart.
Yeah.
That sounds really good. I love that. My mouth is yum.
A little hint of jalapeno mesh just gives it a little kick. It's not hot. It's just got a green flavor.
That green flavor is so good. You know, that is the pyrazine. That's like, I'm studying wine, so forgive me again. I'm gonna push up my glasses. Pyrazines they're found in Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's one of those really distinguishing flavors that can help you tell which wine it is in blind tasting. And it's delicious. So.
Well, thanks.
Yes. So
Yes.
Really my pleasure. So nice to see you. I hope to see you again.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. I enjoyed it.
Oh,
I'll
my
try to catch you next week.
pleasure. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank
All right.
you.